most importantly, peripherality has to be more than distance. Because if it were just distance, China would be peripheral. And I have never heard anybody refer to China as being a peripheral place. Yet it's a distant place. And we know that we ship things to China and we ship things back from China. How can that be? Well, shipping is important, but shipping isn't everything. More importantly, I think, in defining peripherality is weak economic connections. And that means there's limited economic integration, and more importantly, you aren't aware of opportunities. You don't know there's a market out there that you could maybe satisfy. And if you don't know the market's there, you're not going to act to do anything about it. I live in Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky is called Appalachia. Appalachia is one of the poorest parts of the United States. But it's physically proximate to probably 50% of the U.S. population within 4 hours. But it's peripheral. It's unconnected. They built a lot of roads into Appalachia to improve connections, and this goes back to our discussion before lunch about infrastructure. And what that did was allow people to leave easier. It was quicker getting out. So they didn't see the opportunities there. They didn't have the resources to take advantage of the opportunities, but they had the means to leave now. So providing infrastructure may be necessary, but it's not sufficient. So I think you've got to keep in mind these two elements of peripherality, and I'm going to try and demonstrate to you that the second one of weak economic connections is the most important one, but it's the one you can do something about. You can't physically move yourself closer to your markets, but you can connect to them better. All right, so I went to a lot of trouble to find this map. It's really hard to find a map of Europe that includes Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands. Usually it gets lopped off just the other side of Iceland, and you are clearly peripheral by European standards. And you're not even on the map in terms of this one. This is the size of countries by global GDP. So there's the big blob that's the United States, and huge blob for France, Germany, the UK, Spain, another big blob for China. Where are you guys? Well, you're right in between those big purple blobs. So the standard map shows you between Europe and North America, but the standard maps are just physical territory. This, I think, is a more important map because this tells you where the big markets in the world are. And you're in between these two big markets, which might be of some value. A second point that I think our moderator made in his first words were, well, peripheral is a relative term. It's always a core periphery model. So there's always, you're distant from somewhere. And if you change the somewhere, suddenly you become less distant. The state of Chihuahua in Mexico, it's the middle purple thing at the top, right under the M in Mexico, historically has been peripheral in terms of Mexico. Because everything in Mexico takes place in and around Mexico City, which is down in the south, a long way from Chihuahua. Except Mexico joined the North American Free Trade Agreement. And suddenly, Chihuahua was the part of Mexico that was closest to the United States. Can you guess whose economic growth is faster than anywhere else's now in Mexico? Chihuahua and the other states. Because they're now no longer peripheral to economic activity in Mexico City, they're the border with the United States. Their physical location didn't change, but their economic relationships changed. Okay, so everybody's got this map. This is seeing the world from the Arctic Circle, and suddenly the NORA region doesn't look quite as remote as it used to. Okay, I didn't know that this was going to be as interesting, because this is kind of the essence of what we've been talking about for the last couple of hours. Basically, there's 4 modes of transport. And really only 2 of them are interesting for us here in this room. And they're the 2 that aren't that interesting for everybody else. Because if you look at what people talk about in terms of physical connectivity in Europe and in North America, they tend to focus on road and rail and pay limited attention to air and shipping. Road and rail have fixed links. You can only drive on the road. You can only go where the rails take you. If you want to go someplace else, it is incredibly expensive to create another fixed link. But who generally pays for that fixed link? The government. It's not the user of the road and the rail. Now, there might be taxes, but they generally don't cover the full cost of doing that. Conversely, air and ship, there's no fixed links. You can leave the port, go anywhere. Halfway across the ocean, they can tell you to go someplace else. And you just change course. Airplane is exactly the same. There's no investment in connectivity with road and rail. Or, I'm sorry, with air and ship. That conveys a bit of an advantage, I think, because you don't have to pay to connect. You have a free passage on those routes, and that passage isn't limited by your current travel directions. It's open to anywhere if the markets are available to you. So you've got high setup costs for road and rail. You've got very high fixed costs. We talk about the cost of constructing a port. That's trivial compared to constructing 2,000 kilometers of highway. So low setup costs for air and ship, cost per kilogram per kilometer, medium for road and rail, high by air, so you only ship high-value, light things by air, low for ship, so you tend to ship low-value, bulk commodities by ship, speed, fast for air, slow for ship, best distance, long for ship and air, medium and short for truck and rail. Okay, so you've got 2 modes of transportation that suit your situation. That they are very distance insensitive. The big costs in air freight are getting the plane up and getting the plane down. It doesn't cost a lot to fly it once into the air. So distance isn't a big thing for air travel. It's certainly not a big thing for ship travel. So I think one of the things that you want to think about is if you're going to sell stuff, shouldn't you be trying to sell stuff that fits your mode of transport? Because that's how you're going to get it to market. Okay, so that's bulk commodities, I guess. And it's high value, light things that you can ship quickly, perhaps perishables, to other places. So this is all pretty abstract, but it's a way to think about where you are and how you take advantage of your means of communication. The idea of network connectivity is the second element of this. Who you're talking to and how are you doing it? Well, telecom, if you aren't connected by now, then there's something wrong with you. Because telecoms is dirt cheap. It is the cheapest form of infrastructure you can think of. So if you haven't made that investment, I don't think you're really serious about economic development. The second part is more difficult. It's personal knowledge. It's the contacts. When we were in the Faroes in Iceland, I was stunned by the number of people that we'd run into who had been other places for extended periods of time, who knew tons of things about the world. So they have people in the Faroes in Iceland, and I'm guessing in Greenland and in the coastal Norway, have incredible external experiences. I have a hard time getting students in Kentucky to think about leaving the state, let alone leaving the country. Most Americans will never have a passport in their life. They see no reason to ever leave the United States. Now, that may be arrogance, it may be the fact that they don't need to, but it clearly means that they aren't thinking about what can we do with the rest of the world. It doesn't enter into their consciousness. And if you're a small place, you got to think about what do I do with the rest of the world, because that's your market. It's not a local market. You don't have a significant home market. Anything you do really has to be outward oriented. So you need to know about the rest of the world. Where I think you have a problem, and this is a problem that we alluded to, is if you are going to make these 4 places a region, you've got to improve the physical connectivity among them. Now, it's lunacy that you can't get from the Faroes to Iceland. It's almost lunacy that if you do fly to Iceland, you land at the wrong airport. And then you've got to get in the bus and schlep down to the other airport to get on another plane. You have a huge advantage in Icelandair, which connects North America through Reykjavik to Europe. But you've got the connections to the rest of the world. What you lack is the internal connections among the 4 places. And if you want to be a region, you've got to have those personal contacts. When we were in the Faroes, we heard that, well, there used to be a ferry to Aberdeen, and we had lots of kids who'd go to Aberdeen for university. Then the ferry ended, so now they go to Copenhagen. Because you can get to Copenhagen, but you can't get to Aberdeen. So I think it is incredibly important, if you want to address peripherality, that you figure out ways to make those connections happen. And remember, with air and sea, you don't have to pay for the transport link. You just have to pay the variable cost of getting people there and back. So in terms of subsidy, you're not subsidizing the transport route, you're subsidizing the transit. There's a subsidy either way, but probably the transit subsidy makes a lot more sense. And then common media. I think it's really important, or a real advantage, that all of these places have clear cultural, social links and language links that make it easier to relate to each other. So that's a big advantage in terms of building network connectivity. And the one thing that we know about the modern economy is it's a network economy. It's almost more who you know than what you know. You don't have to know the answer to things. You just have to know who to ask to get the answer to things. So you need those contacts. You need to know where the market opportunities are. You need to know how to access the market opportunities. There's really only 2 questions you need to have to answer to start a business. What are you going to make, and who are you going to sell it to? But if you can't answer those 2 questions, you can't have a business. Okay, so the NORA review. This is my take on it. I think it was largely motivated by a concern with peripherality. How do you improve the connections among the members and with potential trading partners? And I think the OECD answered that. And I think it's important that NORA is proactive, because waiting for the world to get better is not a good solution. And there are opportunities. But like God told my father, Ron, if you don't buy a lottery ticket, you won't win. You got to buy the ticket. So, and climate change, protein shortages, search for novelty, outsourcing and fragmented supply chains, niche markets, those are all things that make sense here. But the thing that doesn't make sense here, except in a few rare cases like maybe aluminum in Iceland, is looking for scale. Scale is mass production. I live in a metropolitan area of 480,000 people, Lexington, Kentucky. It's barely in the top 100 in the U.S. terms of U.S. cities. Barely in the top 100. In terms of urban policy, it doesn't even get mentioned. We can't get to scale in Lexington. Clearly, you can't get to scale. So don't think about scale-type things. Think about niche-type things. And the advantage of a niche-type strategy in smaller places is you don't have to create a lot of jobs that make a difference. 10 jobs in one firm, 20 jobs in another firm. Suddenly, that's a big change in local employment. And that's how it all adds up, one piece at a time. Okay, so I'm done, and now we can have a real discussion about peripherality.